I don't know if many of you remember the video that I did regarding the book Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. In the first video, which I'll put in the low bar, I talked about how D.H. Lawrence um, wrote in this book about this couple, the Morels, who felt guilty for conceiving and having another child. Now after, and the child's name is Paul. Now, the oldest son is named William, and then there's a girl in between, and then Paul. So you can watch that in the low bar. Now, William, the oldest son, is a young man who was able to kind of break out of the poverty that his family was in. This is a mining town in England, and it's the people that live there are very poor. And so the family sort of looked at William, the oldest son, as a hero because he was able to go to London and, you know, make a lot of money. And at this point in the book, William's mother gets a telegram from London saying that her son is really ill. And I'll pick up from there. It was 6 o'clock when she arrived at William's lodging. The blinds were not down. "How is he?" she asked. "No better," said the landlady. She followed the woman upstairs. William lay on the bed with bloodshot eyes, his face rather discolored. The clothes were tossed about. There was no fire in the room. A glass of milk stood on the stand at his bedside. No one had been with him. "Why, my son?" said the mother bravely. He did not answer. He looked at her, but did not see her. Then he began to say in a dull voice, as if repeating a letter from dictation, "Owing to a leakage in the hold of this vessel, the sugar had set and become converted into rock. It needed hacking." He was quite unconscious. It had been his business to examine some such cargo of sugar in the port of London. "How long has he been like this?" the mother asked the landlady. "Well, he got home at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, and he seemed to sleep all day. Then in the night we heard him talking, and this morning he asked for you, so I wired, and we fetched the doctor. Will you have a fire made?" Miss Morel tried to soothe her son, to keep him still. The doctor came. It was pneumonia, and, he said, a peculiar, I think it's erysipelas, which had started under the chin where the collar chafed, and was spreading over the face. He hoped it would not get to the brain. Mrs. Morel settled down to nurse. She prayed for William, prayed that he would recognize her, but the young man's face grew more discolored. In the night she struggled with him. He raved and would not come to consciousness. At 2 o'clock, in a dreadful paroxysm, he died. Mrs. Morel sat perfectly still for an hour in the lodging bedroom. Then she roused the household. At 6 o'clock, with the aid of the charwoman, she laid him out. Then she went round the dreary London village to the registrar and the doctor. At 9 o'clock, to the cottage on Scargill Street, came another wire. "William died last night. Let father come. Bring money." So now the family gets together and realizes that they have to prepare for William's funeral. And so they have William delivered in a coffin to their own home back where they live in this poor area, mining area. And William was buried in a cemetery near where they live in their neighborhood. Now I'm going to go forward to Paul. Now, if you remember again, Paul is the infant that Mrs. Morell talked about feeling guilty for having conceived again. Now, Paul is really disturbed at this point by his mother because his mother has gone into a deep depression over the death of her oldest son, William. Just have to forward here, sorry. Okay. So Paul is trying to get his mother's attention. When Paul came home at night, he found his mother sitting, her day's work done, with hands folded on her lap upon her coarse apron. She always used to have changed her dress and put on a black apron before. Now Annie set his supper, and his mother sat looking blankly in front of her, her mouth shut tight. Then he beat his brains for news to tell her. Mother, Miss Jordan was down today, and she said my sketch of a colliery at work was beautiful. But Mrs. Morell took no notice. Night after night he forced himself to tell her things, although she did not listen. It drove him almost insane to have her thus. At last, "What's the matter, Mother?" he asked. She did not hear. "What's the matter?" he persisted. "Mother, what's the matter?" "You know what's the matter," she said irritably, turning away. The lad, he was 16 years old, went to bed drearily. He was cut off and wretched through October, November, and December. His mother tried, but she could not rouse herself. She could only brood on her dead son. He had been let to die so cruelly. At last, on December 23rd, with his 5 shillings, Christmas box in his pocket, Paul wandered blindly home. His mother looked at him, and her heart stood still. "What's the matter?" she asked. "I'm badly, Mother," he replied. "Mr. Jordan gave me 5 shillings for a Christmas box." He handed it to her with trembling hands. She put it on the table. "You aren't glad?" he reproached her, but he trembled violently. "Where hurts you?" she said, unbuttoning his overcoat. It was the old question. "I feel badly, Mother." She undressed him and put him to bed. He had pneumonia, dangerously, the doctor said. "Might he never have had it if I'd kept him at home, not let him go to Nottingham?" was one of the first things she asked. "He might not have been so bad," said the doctor. Mrs. Morell stood condemned on her own ground. "I should have watched the living, not the dead," she told herself. Paul was very ill. His mother lay in bed at nights with him. They could not afford a nurse. He grew worse, and the crisis approached. One night he tossed into consciousness in the ghastly, sickly feeling of dissolution, when all the cells in the body seem in intense irritability to be breaking down, and consciousness makes a last flare of struggle, like madness. "I'll die, Mother," he cried, heaving for breath on the pillow. She lifted him up, crying in a small voice, "Oh, my son, my son." That brought him to. He realized her. His whole will rose up and arrested him. He put his head on her breast and took ease of her for love. "For some things," said his aunt. "It was a good thing Paul was ill that Christmas. I believed it saved his mother." Paul was in bed for 7 weeks. He got up white and fragile. His father had bought him a pot of scarlet and gold tulips. They used to flame in the window in the March sunshine as he sat on the sofa chattering to his mother. The two knitted together in perfect intimacy. Mrs. Morell's life now rooted itself in Paul. William had been a prophet. Mrs. Morell had a little present and a letter from Lily at Christmas. Mrs. Morell's sister had a letter at the New Year. Now, Lily was William's girlfriend. So then D.H. Lawrence talks about how the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Morell gets a little calmer, and they're a little more humbled now that their oldest son has died. And so, yeah, I thought that was another interesting aspect to add to the first video. You know, the parents realizing that continuing to bring children into the world, they know, that it's not a good thing, but yet they kept doing it, and they had, I believe, how many more children? Well, they had Paul, and then they had another son after that. So she did get pregnant again. Um, and I think it's interesting the way um, D.H. Lawrence writes the story and describes very graphically the the end of life for this young man, and then the sickness of the next son. And I think this is meant to show, well, a few things. It's meant to show the suffering, but it's also, I think D.H. Lawrence is trying to comment, especially with the funeral of William, that the fact that they're a poor family and the sons have tried to go off and be successful in sort of a higher class, really means nothing, because in the end, in the end, William dies, and he's brought back to the neighborhood, the neighborhood in poverty, and he's buried there. He's not buried in London. So, just some things to think about. I'm only about, let's see, I'm 34% through this book, and it will be interesting to see how D.H. Lawrence handles the rest of this, because he is touching on these themes. Okay, thanks for listening.